Hello, manager. This is Victor Mark Romo, your strategic planning coach and performance manager. Today, we're going to review 6 ways to screen job candidates for strategic thinking. The authorship is by Mr. John Sullivan, which is a professor of management at San Francisco State University and an international known HR thought leader from Silicon Valley. He's a prolific author with more than 1,200 articles and 10 books covering all areas of talent management. Welcome to our strategic coffee session. Every organization needs strategic thinkers. In a recent management research group survey, when executives were asked to select the leadership behaviors that were most critical to their organization's future success, 97% of the time they choose being strategic. But what is being strategic? This is sometimes a very word that is misconceived or used wrongly. Sometimes strategy is come by using it as a plan. A strategy is a new way to think, in which you need to have a short, a long, a medium term view. You need to learn about your organization, your employees, your customers, your suppliers, your fellow employees, and deliver under specific strategic factors. This is because people who can think strategically add value in four main ways. First, by being forward looking, they help ensure that an organization is fully prepared for a difficult to predict future. Second, their big picture perspective helps a firm avoid major problems with their key stakeholders and conflicts by connecting the dots and seeing the interrelationship between business elements. When you connect the dots and see the interrelationship between KPIs, you can detect which strategic factors are lacking. So people need to see the big picture. Third, their external focus keeps everyone aware of emerging trends in the economy and the industry. Also, when you're a strategic thinker, you need to think and view the economy and the industry that you are. Otherwise, you're going to lag behind. And fourth, they have a global perspective. Unfortunately, assessing whether a candidate is a strategic thinker is far from easy. You always see and read job descriptions when you are a candidate, and you always see to think strategically, to know about strategic marketing, to develop strategic plans. But sometimes, I would say almost all of the times, this term is misconceived. It is used wrongly. It is used to express planning or to express being extroverted or to express being financially aware. So when you are using the term strategic and also in job descriptions, you have to be specific and accurate with your descriptions. Please, this is for talent acquisition. You need to tighten up your job descriptions. They need to be a match between your job description and the reality. of the concept, of the theory, and the action of strategy. Said this, let's continue. The job interview is often the best opportunity to accurately separate out people who have this relatively rare talent from the high volume of candidates. So you, as a recruiter, need to be aware of this, and also as a hiring manager. People almost all the time have only tactical capabilities. So don't rely on your job applicant to tell you whether they are strategic. Instead, use one of these 6 interview and question approach in order to assess your candidate if he is truly strategic and he or she is a person that you want for your organization. If you are looking for strategic thinkers and doers rather than only tactical and operational managers. Question number 1. Give them a real problem to solve. This is the most effective approach by far. Provide promising candidates a problem to solve during the interview. You can use a real unsolved problem, which has the advantage of providing you with several potential solutions. Or you can use a problem that you already solved, which means you'll know the critical steps that should be included in an answer. With either option, you should verbally describe the problem or provide a written description. Give the candidate a few minutes to think, to develop, to write some notes, to take some notes, to ask some questions, and then ask them to walk you through the steps they would take to investigate and resolve the problem. Remember, almost all strategic problems have to do with key stakeholders, customers, other employees, owners or CEOs, suppliers, fellow employees, or things about the industry, the economy, or maybe something more advanced like a geo-economic or geopolitical issue that your company would face. For example, if you are a car assembly and you see that there is a serious threat that China invades Taiwan, then your suppliers of semiconductors and other important components could be compromised. So, you need to assess this issue firsthand. That is a strategic way to view it. What you should look for in a response will vary according to a particular problem you asked them to solve, but essential steps should be included in every answer. Compile a list of potential problems. Check the strategic plan. Review company and industry multi-year forecast, goals, KPIs. Identify and track key industry, economic, environmental factors, or key stakeholders and their strategic factors. Identify and consult with key stakeholders across departments and business units, and also for customers and suppliers. Depending on the question, you may also look for these steps in their answer. That they identify interconnected and interdependent functional areas, including maybe some KPIs or predictive matrix, like some KPI mapping. That is a key gold flag. Look for red flags, green flags, and gold flags. When candidates point out key KPI mapping, they are being really strategic. Pretest solutions with your customers. This, my friend, is developing maybe or addressing new strategic factors for your customers. That is something about price, customer service, quality, innovation, what your customers are really seeking out with your product or service. Measure success after implementation and use data to make adjustments. In most cases, omitting a critical step, such as checking with the customers, would be a clear knockout factor for any candidate. That is a red flag. Because it is not that the candidate is bad at all, but the candidate is merely operational or tactical. He or she is not at all strategic. In addition to assessing the individual steps, you should also look out for an answer that includes too many tactical steps and not enough of strategic focus, factors, and key stakeholders. Question number 2. Ask them to review a flawed strategic plan and identify potential problems. A second tactic is to provide an early draft of your organization or department current strategic plan and ask candidates to identify any significant flaws or omissions. Since you already know the problems that occurred, it should be relatively easy to evaluate a candidate's ability to identify potential issues. If the individual can find a significant percentage issue or problem of what you already know to be the flaws and omissions, it's very unlikely they are a strategic thinker. For example, you can ask to assess some costs versus the revenue, and maybe the candidate would need to be able to point out an approximate percentage of the annual revenue versus, for example, the monthly costs or the yearly costs. That pointing out some key ratios about revenue, about sales, about pipeline, about strategic factors, customers, about industry, growth in the industry, potential of growth. It's great. He doesn't have to calculate the thing. He could have just brought up some homework done and point that out. Every day, information is pointed out at articles, at the internet, at the company webpage. So the candidate really takes some time to assess, not in depth, but maybe in just some bullet points, that kind of issues, is a very green flag candidate. Question 3. Ask specific interview questions. Several questions can reveal whether a candidate has strategic thinking or not, and also the questions that he asks at the end of the interview. Are they strategic or not? And don't brag and don't give candidates a false expectancy. You need to be very open and say, hey, we're looking here for a strategic candidate. Someone who can think in terms of strategy, of industry, of key stakeholders, of planning, of KPIs. So, I'm going to ask you these questions. For example, please try to develop them at the comments. I would be glad to see your answers. How would you go about connecting the dots and identifying interrelationships and interdependencies in a proposed strategic plan? That is, for example, by mapping some KPIs. Question 2. When you are working on a strategic project in your current job, how do you go about identifying the relevant stakeholders across the field? You know about key stakeholders. How can the candidate identify them? Maybe he is only working with HR, with some operations at HR, some learning, and he is not translating that project into the whole strategic organization, the whole key stakeholders, like customers, owners, or top management, or suppliers, or the industry, or the economy, or regional economy, or investing in some new plant. Question 3. What steps have you taken during your career to become a more strategic thinker? What measures or indicators do you have for growing the skill? And this is a key question, my fellow recruiters and hiring managers. If a candidate is not able to explain how he could be more strategic thinker or what steps he have done to be more strategic, then or instead he explains about some operations, then he is not your candidate. What steps would you take to identify which job candidates are strategic thinkers? The answer here is helpful in two ways. It will both give you ideas to improve your assessment and provide insight into the candidate's depth of understanding on the topic and how they describe themselves against that criteria. I have gone to several interviews the last year, and sometimes when you don't know, the recruiter is just pointed out something, they're taking some notes, but any recruiting person or HR person has asked me something strategic. They rely a lot in personal issues, a lot about operational things, the smart parameter of interview, but nothing strategic. If this is the case, you need to point the interview out. Hey, I thought, or I have read that in the description, this was a strategic role. I want to point out how can add value by overseeing the key stakeholders, the industry, the economy, some key KPIs. So think that about my friend. 4. Look for strategic phrases within the answers to your standard interview questions. As we were saying, you, as a recruiter, need to point out and know about strategy. This also could be a differentiator for your job. If you present, hey, I have 3 candidates, and number 1 and number 2 is far more strategic than number 3, because of these KPIs that I have identified at the interview, it would be so much greater for the hiring manager to take a decision or to go more informed to the final interview. rather than he is single, he have studied abroad, he likes operations, he is a customer care manager, he knows about how to use the software, he is very good at Excel. These are great questions, don't get me wrong, but if you're assessing strategy, this is not helping you at all. This is for you, HR recruiters. Please take that in mind. I have been in countless of interviews when I was presenting my services or products, and anybody rarely asks me about strategy. Few strategic thinkers actually label themselves with that description of strategic thinker. Unfortunately, many other words and phrases can indicate the skill. Strategic goals, multi-year, cross-functional, increasing profitability, revenue, margins, market share, connecting the dots, key stakeholders, data-driven, root cause analysis, consulting, etc. These are keywords that strategic thinkers use at their CV and at the interviews. Individuals who routine quantify the results in dollars or revenue impacts are highly likely to be strategic. After a candidate uses one of these phrases, the interviewer can ask them to define the phrase and explain its importance. This will help distinguish interviewees who are using catchphrases to impress you from those who truly understand these words and phrases. 5. Ask questions that reveal how much they value strategic thinking. For example, if you ask a candidate to list their capabilities from most to least important, you can get an understanding of how important they think strategic capabilities are. Alternatively, you can ask them to list a few ideal or dream projects they like to work on in the future, or then consider what percentage of those dream projects are strategic. Because strategic thinking involves continuous learning, continuous researching. You can ask candidates to name the specific learning sources, the learning strategy. If they learn in a virtual environment, in a classroom, they go out and seek for a book or seek for a colleague to ask some questions, etc., that they use to expand their capabilities. They should be able to immediately name resources, and you can compare those sources with your current employees' use. Ask them questions about your firm's strategy, strategic products, recent strategic blunders, and strategic competitors. Have they made or they know what a strategic competitor matrix is that point out strategic factors for competitors? That, my friend, is a breakthrough, a turnaround in your interview. The best candidates will have done this research in advance. As I was saying, they have made their homework prior to the interview. If they haven't, you should pass on them. 6. Consider the questions they ask you. This is crucial, my friends. The right candidate will proactively ask their own questions related to strategy, rather than the do and just filling up questions like, how is a day here at the job? What the ideal candidate would look like? I think that, my friends, are just some past and questions that you should strengthen up in order to be a better candidate. You should take note of the number and quality of the strategic questions they ask. and be suspicious when a candidate doesn't ask any. For example, you should give positive points when a candidate asks a question: how this job fit into the corporate strategy? What of the activities in a day-to-day basis are strategy? Questions related to planned changes to future corporate strategy, the opportunities they'll have to contribute to strategy, and the strategic things that are happening within the department, within the business unit, within the organization. Because the best thinkers are action oriented. Expect them to ask questions related to the implementation of ideas. So remember, my friends, these strategic coffees are ideas that you could implement right on. Put them into action. Today, for your next interview, you can discuss them with your boss. You can discuss them with your hiring leader. I have been in a lot of interviews, and none of them are strategic. So sometimes you don't know if you should ask or not. They assess you in the way you communicate with your nowadays with your liberal or conservative ideas. If you think about strategy or not is not pointed out at the table. So step up, point strategy on the table for your next interview. Because the best thinkers are action oriented. Expect them to ask questions related to the implementation of ideas. I'm often asked by executives or maybe HR recruiters what percentage of employees in a firm should be strategic thinkers, leaders, innovators, or merely operational. My answer is always the same. You can have too many. Unfortunately, few companies ever end up with a surplus of this exceptional talent, in part because their interview approach doesn't accurately identify them, as I was saying. Please, HR recruiters, hiring managers, it's time to start thinking, asking the right strategic questions. And in the next strategic coffee, we are going to point out what are some abilities that some leaders could point out. Do leaders balance agility and consistency, or both, or just one of them? These are key skills to look for in candidates in 2023. Said this, my fellow HR recruiter. Goodbye. Please point out your questions at the comment section. I will be very glad to help you. How can you upgrade your interview in order to look out for strategic thinkers? Or also during the CV part. Nowadays, with just a simple Google form, you can ask 2-3 questions about something pointed out in strategy. That, my friends, is just a way to filter candidates just by 2-3 questions about strategy, about key stakeholders, about industry, about competitive matrices. So, step up, and thank you for listening and watching. Please have a wonderful day and see you in the next strategic coffee. If you hear some buzz and rust, it's because I am recording from my regular cafeteria office. where I work, where I can have some coffee, develop strategic ideas, and point them out. So, goodbye, and please ask me your strategic questions. Sorry to be so repetitive, but it's a crucial thing in a strategic candidate or not. Goodbye. This was Victor Marrom, your strategic planning and performance management coach. Goodbye.